Welcome to Question Time, the only place where people can put questions directly to those in power and those who want to be in power. Tonight we're in the North Lincolnshire town of Scunthorpe. This area voted overwhelmingly to leave the EU in 2016 and was Labour-dominated until the Conservatives took the seat in 2019. And tonight, Nadhim Zahawi's former cabinet colleague has some very interesting things to say about his current position. We'll also be talking about Ukraine, levelling up, and whether women should have the legal right to leave during the menopause. Welcome to Question Time. On our panel from the Conservative Party, Jake Berry. He was previously Minister for the Northern Powerhouse. More recently, he was party chairman in Liz Truss's cabinet, alongside man of the moment Nadhim Zahawi. He now lurks on the backbenches. Labour's Tracy Brabin is the Mayor of West Yorkshire, one-time star of Coronation Street. She traded acting and writing about fictional family politics for the real thing when she was elected as an MP in 2016. She served on the party's front bench in several roles before becoming the country's first female Metro Mayor 2 years ago. Alison Phillips runs one of the country's most read newspapers, the Daily Mirror, a job she's been doing since 2018. This week, the paper's front page had a useful guide for Tories, including how to pay taxes, wear a seatbelt, and how to apply to your bank for a loan. And Konstantin Kisin grew up in the Soviet Union before moving here when he was 11. Now an author and satirist, he co-hosts the Trigonometry YouTube show, mostly examining social and cultural issues. His recent speech in an Oxford Union debate, arguing for the end of so-called woke culture, has been viewed over 15 million times, if not more now. Konstantin, you tell me. Welcome. Good evening to our panel, to our audience here in Scunthorpe, which, as always, reflects the electoral support for our political parties, and, of course, to all of you at home. We're going to have a lively debate here, but do feel free to add your opinion on social media at BBC Question Time. Let's hear what you've got to say. Let's take our first question from Andy Johnson.
Good evening, panel. Rishi Sunak states integrity and accountability are important to me. Can Nadhim Zahawi stay in post after the tax disclosure saga?
Jake, as a former Conservative Party chairman yourself, can he stay in post?
So I know Nadhim Zahawi very well. I'd consider him a friend, and he has done, in previous ministerial roles, an excellent job. I think he was an extraordinary vaccine minister in charge of the vaccine rollout here across the UK, and I worked with him very closely in the Cabinet Office, most recently in Liz Truss's government. But even though he is a friend of mine, I'm not going to allow that to distract from a view I have put forward consistently in relation to all these sorts of issues, is that the government needs to find a mechanism for ministers and MPs who are under investigation in this way to step aside, to clear their name, and then to come back into government if that is appropriate. I think from Nadhim, great individual that he is, that will be the right thing to do now. I applaud Rishi Sunak for fast-forwarding this investigation, which we learnt this week will be concluded in around 10 days. But I do think it's unsustainable for a minister to stay in his post while this investigation goes on, including other ministers who are also under investigation, not least because we have learnt that when you want the public to have faith and trust in these investigations, one of the key things is for that individual to step away from power, because it takes away a perception that they have some influence or some ability to alter the investigation because they remain in that position of power.
So you think Nadhim Zahawi should step aside, which of course he's not doing at the moment, and presumably you think that Rishi Sunak should ensure that he steps aside, which he's also not doing?
Well, I think we've got to create a mechanism for that to happen. That is absolutely my view, and I've consistently stated it for several years, actually, so it's nothing new. I do think that's really, really important, but it needs to apply to MPs as well. So there are several MPs who are currently under investigation. There is no mechanism for members of Parliament to step aside to enable these investigations to go ahead. There are mechanisms, and I appreciate it's completely different when ministers go on maternity leave or have sickness leave. I appreciate it's completely different from the current situation. But it's those sorts of mechanisms that should enable people to step aside, clear their name, and come back into government if in fact they are found to have done nothing wrong, or come back into Parliament if they're found to have done nothing wrong. But I think it's really important that we let those investigations take place without people being in that position.
When you say investigations, obviously Dominic Raab is being investigated for bullying allegations. Do you think he should step aside as well?
Yeah, I called for that before Christmas, so I haven't changed my
Any
view.
others that I haven't thought of?
There's none I can think of, but I did call for it before Christmas. And look, you know, for consistency, the Labour Party has correctly called on the Prime Minister to appoint an independent ethics advisor. That's the right thing to do. And I'm really pleased that Rishi in December appointed that independent ethics advisor. If you believe in that role, as I do, and the Labour Party has consistently said it does, and if you believe that those investigations should take place, as I do, and the Labour Party has consistently said they should, then you have to create the space for those investigations to take place. And I just think, it's a personal view, I think actually people stepping aside to create that space will be the right thing, not just for the government, but actually for those under investigation as well.
Tracy?
Well, I don't think he should necessarily step aside and there should be this independent investigation. It's as clear as day what's gone on. And it just shows how weak Rishi Sunak is, that he hasn't made the decision to get rid of the party chairman who's now the story. And it makes me just really believe in devolution and that local leaders should live in their communities, because I've been able to focus on the safety of women and girls because I have been a survivor of violence from men. I'm slash bus fares because I'm a commuter on buses and trains. I'm investing in a cost of living crisis package for businesses and for households, because as a freelancer for 30 years, I understand going from paycheck to paycheck.
Sorry, you've lost me now. We're going off at a tangent here.
My point is the disconnect with a Prime Minister who's using a private jet to come to Leeds from London. And now we have the leader of the party saying, well, we need a private investigation. He's been using an offshore, system to avoid paying tax.
Well, hang on. Wait a minute. Just so we don't all end up in court.
Yes. So
let's be completely clear. That Nadeem Zahawi says that the HMRC, the taxman to you and me, agreed with his accountants that he never set up and is not the beneficiary of that offshore trust, Balshore Investments. There is the question of some £99,000 he seemed to have received as a dividend, and that is unclear. But he says, and he's saying the revenue agree with him, that he has not been a beneficiary of it.
But he has been investigated by...
And he's paid a penalty.
But he's been investigated by, the department that he was leading.
As Chancellor.
As Chancellor. And what you've got is a party that is corrupt, and we've just got to drain the swamp. We have got to get back to some sort of level where the public are treated with respect because of the people, the people who represent them
let's hear from the
live
public.
like them, not disconnected in the way that we're seeing.
The woman there in the pink scarf.
It's nothing short of misconduct in a public office for him to be accused of that while he was Chancellor.
Misconduct in public office. Well, obviously there's this investigation going on, and we'll wait to hear what they say. Yes, the man here in the grey sweater.
Yeah. Nadeem Zahawi pointed out earlier on that he was... it was a smear campaign when he was wanted to be the leader.
So hang on. So this is there was a journalist who was trying to write about him, and Nadeem Zahawi's lawyers basically tried to stop the journalist printing these stories.
That is absolutely
and
correct.
said that he was being smeared.
And I do sometimes wonder about this independent advisor, because a lot of the time it's the actual Rishi Sunak makes the final decision, or Boris Johnson made the final decision. How can that be independent?
Yeah, so why bother going through with the independent advisor?
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, Jake, what about that? Because in the end, the independent advisor can advise, but Rishi Sunak's going to make the decision at the end of the day.
Well, he'll have to make the decision.
So can he just not make the decision now?
Well, he should make the decision based on the facts. And we've learnt today that Nadeem Zahawi has consented for all of his tax records as a private individual, all of his tax records to be released to the independent advisor. Ultimately, this comes down to the Prime Minister's judgment when he is in possession of all the facts. And that is the point of the investigation, is to ensure that the Prime Minister is presented with those facts, and his decision about whether to fire or to retain Nadeem Zahawi, the buck stops with him. But he's got to have the facts. Nadeem Zahawi, just to be clear, is maintaining that he has done nothing wrong. I believe
he's maintaining that he was careless but not deliberate.
Well, yeah,
Careless
okay.
with many millions.
Careless but not
quite
deliberate.
extraordinary.
But, you know, it's really easy, isn't it, to sort of throw people, you know, under a bus and say, well, actually, there are these allegations against them, they should resign. But if you believe in the process, and you may say that you don't agree with the Independent Ethics Advisor, but it's the leader of your party who's been calling for him to be put in place and to conduct exactly the sort of investigation that he's doing. If you may not agree with it, but if Keir Starmer believes in it, this ethics advisor has to be given the space to make the investigation, and then ultimately the Prime Minister can make a decision when he has all the facts.
The woman here in the front.
I think there is a mechanism. It's called resigning.
OK. We hear you. It's the woman in the red shirt there.
I am a local GP, and trust is such a vital component of my profession. I mean, no disrespect to you, sir, and I don't mean to embarrass you at all, but we've had so many incidents, from Matt Hancock to Boris Johnson to now Nadeem Zahawi and lots of others. I just really struggle to understand how we can trust the Conservative Party. And like I said, I don't mean to embarrass you at all.
So politely put. My goodness. The man in the grey sweater there.
Well, welcome to Scunthorpe, by the way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Are we saying that the definition of the word careless is wrong in the Oxford English Dictionary?
What do you mean?
Well, the word careless and the use of the word careless, I think, differs from the one in the dictionary.
Well, it has a specific meaning when used in the context of tax law, I'm told, and the boss of Revenue and Customs was in front of MPs today, and for what it's worth, he said there are no penalties, which, as we know, Nadeem Zahawi has paid one, no penalties for innocent errors in your tax affairs. Alison.
Well, going back to the original question, I am absolutely staggered as to how Nadeem Zahawi is still in a job. I mean, on so many levels, this is wrong, and all it is doing is painting a picture to all of us here, all of us across the country, that is one rule for rich Tories who are governing us and one rule for the rest of us, and we're just not playing in the same ballpark. This week of all weeks, all around the country, you've got self-employed people having to fill in their tax returns before we get to the end of the month, and the rest of us who just do PAYE and you don't get any choice, you just have to do it. The very idea that we've got somebody there who has got into this situation, who was Chancellor of the Exchequer when he was going through this situation with the HMRC, and as to how he's still in a job. So this time, he hasn't been straight with us, but he hasn't been straight with his boss. So, you know, a week ago, poor Rishi Sunak had to stand up in Prime Minister's questions and say, no, it's all over, nothing to see here, that's fine. The following week, he has to get up, and because he, like the rest of us, found out in the papers over the weekend that not only was there a £5 million, he'd had to shell out £5 million, but £1 million of that was a penalty. Which
we don't know that for a fact that it was a
million. It's around about $1 million.
Well, OK, you may know that. I'd say at the BBC we don't know that.
That bit hasn't been denied by anybody.
OK, it hasn't been accepted.
And also, as Fiona's just said, that the boss of the NHMRC said today, you don't get a penalty if you're innocent. So it's pretty much there. But surely Rishi Sunak must have called him in and say, hang on a minute, how come I've just found out that what you said to me last week was not the whole truth? And you've made me look an absolute clown. You've caused distrust in the country, and this is continuing. And I think the other thing the gentleman there raised, which really cuts for me, is the idea that last July, Nadeem Zahawi was using his very expensive lawyers to send out letters to get journalists and investigators to stop looking at this and say, this is not true, I'm going to sue you. We're seeing so much of this in this country at the moment, of like very rich people using the law to evade proper scrutiny. And the idea that we've got somebody who's in our government that was doing that, it's just appalling. It stinks. And I think Rishi Sunak, when he came out and he said that stuff at the beginning about integrity and professionalism and accountability, we all thought, great, because that as a country is what we deserve and that's what we want. And he's let himself down. He's allowed one of his closest advisors to let him down. I just think it's a real shame for all of us.
Can I just ask you, you know, you say politicians are being expected to be treated differently. Do you just fire people from the Daily Mirror on the basis of allegations? What actually Rishi Sunak is doing, and what I'm calling for him to do, is to treat Nadeem Zahawi in the same way you'd be treated working for the Daily Mirror or for Tesco's or Sainsbury's across the road from this hall, to have a proper investigation and then make a decision at the end of that investigation. You don't fire people from the paper on the basis of a rumour. You say, let me learn the facts and I will make a decision. That's what I'm calling the Prime Minister to do. The additional step he should take, in my view, is do what all other employers would do, including your newspaper and employers in this town, and suspend that individual or that individual step aside while the investigation takes place. That isn't MPs asking to be treated differently. That is MPs being treated like every single other employee in this nation.
But here you've got a minister who has brought his government into a sort of a sense of disrepute that people are feeling we can't trust them. So, on a purely political basis, surely Rishi Sunak does not want his government being dragged down by somebody who is now distrusted.
OK, let's hear... Is there anyone in the audience who shares Jake's view? Because some of you are clapping. So let's hear from you. Yes, the man in the red sweater.
Yeah, so I completely agree. Having worked in industry for many years, if somebody had done something wrong, you have to find out the facts. I ended up in court defending somebody who had gone through an allegation of bullying, and until the facts were laid out, you couldn't make a decision.
I mean, there's obviously been an investigation by the Inland Revenue, so those facts are there.
But he's not losing his job as an MP, it's just his role within government.
And the man a little bit further along in the blue check shirt, yeah.
Yeah, as Jake was saying, why should you lose your job for something that may turn out not to be true?
What aspect may not turn out to be true? Because we know that he settled... He reached a settlement with the Inland Revenue and that he's paid a penalty, so that he accepts.
But until the review has found him, say, guilty or not guilty, then surely he should be allowed to stay where he is until the final decision is given.
All right. And the woman there in the glasses and the black and white top?
Unlike business, government ministers are appointed by the Prime Minister. They don't go through the same recruitment process. So the Prime Minister surely then has the ability to sack them without due process, because they don't go through due process to be appointed.
Okay. Konstantin, we haven't heard from you.
Well, Jake gave a good effort, and I admire someone defending their friend, but when he described Nadhim Zahawi as an extraordinary vaccine minister, he was extraordinary in his deceitfulness. He said that vaccine passports were discriminatory and that they wouldn't be introduced in this country before proceeding to introduce them. So this is not someone that inspires a lot of trust in me. And
hang on a minute. When you say we had vaccine passports,
yes,
you may mean something different by vaccine passport. We had the NHS app.
Yes.
And we could show if we
he
had
said
a vaccine
that would be
or not.
discriminatory and wouldn't be introduced.
But we didn't.
And then
there were lots of
them.
instances where we weren't, as, for example, they have been in China, forbidden from going to literally...
Well, I'm very grateful we didn't become China.
So we didn't have vaccine passports in that sense?
We had the programme that he said would not be introduced and promised it wouldn't be introduced and called it discriminatory. But anyway, let's not focus on that. If we come back to the point about this current situation, as you said yourself, HMRC, the boss of HMRC, said today that innocent people don't pay penalties.
No, he said there are no penalties. I'm just going to be completely clear. There are no penalties for innocent errors in your tax affairs.
Right.
That's what he said.
So we can conclude from that it was not an innocent error then.
And he wasn't specifically talking about Nadhim Zahawi, but he was just talking generally.
But Nadhim Zahawi paid a penalty.
Yes.
So it was not an innocent error. Can we agree on that?
My opinion doesn't count, folks. I just want to hear what you got to say.
Just following the logic of what you're saying. But I actually do agree with Jake. I think there needs to be a proper investigation. But he should have resigned on day one for that investigation to happen. And there is a touch of the Hancock about this, an unfortunate turn of phrase given why he left. Because we're in a position where a minister is dragging on a situation that is clearly going to end up in them resigning one way or another. He's not going to stay. This is not sustainable, and this is embarrassing the Prime Minister. It's embarrassing the party. And the sooner he resigns for a fair investigation to take place, the better for the Conservative Party and for the country.
Very briefly, and that's on.
Just very quickly, just to pick up on the GP's point, this is absolutely about trust. And over the last few years, aren't we just sick of it being spun what feels like a lie? And you've got the ex-Prime Minister asking a friend to get him a loan of £800,000, and then that person who did that for him now becomes the chairman of the BBC. I mean, it just feels so corrupt.
He says, my God, honestly, I feel like I'm some kind of,
expensive
honestly, I'm mullered. Just to be clear about that, what the BBC chairman says is that he did not set up the loan or the guarantee.
Yes.
He just passed on a name to the cabinet secretary. Anyway,
but the problem is, Fiona, the problem is with that, and that is probably true, but the public have just felt year in, year out, betrayed by their leadership, that they don't feel they can trust the leadership. And I do think that Rishi Sunak has been incredibly weak. He could have said, you are the story, I can't afford you to be the story, move over, let Jake take his job back, who knows?
All right, Jake, come back and be Bang Party chairman, is that what you're saying?
It's a sad state of affairs.
Does that apply also to Labour MPs? Because, of course, the Labour former chief whip is currently suspended from Parliament, and no one knows why. And there is a journalist who currently asks Keir Starmer every single day of the week on Twitter, why is that individual suspended from Parliament, suspended from the Labour Party? Do you need this transparency on a cross-party basis? Because I think there are real questions to ask, which is why, actually, I started by saying I think we need a new mechanism where both ministers and members of Parliament can step back when these investigations go on.
Yeah, but of course Nadhim Zahawi is...
Well, do you want to respond to Jake's point?
Yeah, I think the point is that transparency is important. I don't know the ins and outs of that. I'm no longer in the House of Parliament.
It's a secret.
But I'm no longer in the House of Parliament. But I would say my point is about the public, and our trust and respect for politicians has been eroded by 13 years of Conservative government letting us down.
You've made that point.
May I make a very quick point on this, which is we've spent, I think, probably about 10 minutes talking about this.
20. Which is why I'm thinking let's get on to the next one.
Well, quite. But the point I was going to make is the reason that he needed to resign on day one is precisely because we are spending all this time talking about when we've got a cost of living crisis, we've got a war in Europe.
OK. Well, in that case, let's move on. Before we do, I just want to tell you that next week Question Time is in Glasgow, and the week after that we're in the southwest of England, in Swindon. So if you would like to come along and be part of the audience, look what fun it is, isn't it? So interesting. If you'd like to come to either show or any of the future shows after that, go to the Question Time website. The address is on the screen, and you can see where we will be, and you can apply there to come and be part of our audience, and we would love to see you. Right, talking of audience, let's take another question now from Anne Johnson. Yes, here in the front.
Northern leaders say levelling up should be hardwired into UK law to help close the gap in living standards. Does the panel believe this will help to tackle unequal living standards?
Yes, so this was something that they were saying yesterday at a conference, sort of Northern Powerhouse conference, that levelling up should be hardwired into law as opposed to relying on decisions by government about where the money's going to go. Tracy?
Yep, well, I agree. You won't be surprised to know that I agree. And
how would that work, actually? What does it mean, hardwired into law? What would that law look like?
Well, that means that wherever you live, you should expect the same standard of living. So whether that's the same access to a bus, whether that's the same access to a good job, a college course, where you could get the same amount of money for the similar job. We know that levelling up doesn't work. That phrase is done and dusted. And I would say at the Convention of the North, you were missed, Jake. Where were you?
I wasn't invited.
You could always come. You could always come. But we know that this idea of levelling up, and it's been a government flagship, the levelling up funds, the £2 billion that's much lauded, that's going to really, reset the dial. I mean, I think here you applied for £70 million worth of funding. Did you get 20 million? In West Yorkshire, Leeds had 6 bids and wasn't successful in any. Bradford, a brilliant bid in an area of regeneration and deprivation for Odsal Stadium. No money at all. It is not good enough. This piecemeal, as Lisa and Andy says, the Hunger Games style of bidding against each other is not the way you level up our country. What you have to do is you have to embolden and deepen devolution across the whole country. Now, as mayors, we have limited powers, some powers, which are very welcome, but bidding into these beauty contests way of funding our ambitions is holding us back. And I think it's really important that we get a deeper and wider settlement, so a single pot, we can spend that more efficiently, where we have responsibilities over skills. We know what our businesses need, where we can tackle the climate emergency and also tackle poor housing. We don't have those powers. We can make a massive difference.
I'll just bring in the rest of the panel if I can. And you all looked rather puzzled, actually, when Tracy said, have you had any money from the Levelling Up Fund? Just so you know, no, you haven't. Though you have had money from other funds, but not from the Levelling Up Fund. So, Jake, do you support this idea? First of all, are you critical of the way the Levelling Up funding has been handed out? Do you support the idea of it being hardwired into law? And if so, how would that work?
Yeah, I do support it. And actually, to some extent, with the Levelling Up Bill is currently going into through Parliament with some long-term missions, which are about transforming the communities that Tracy and I actually have the privilege of representing as politicians. Just to put in your mind how big this challenge is, the income disparity between the poorest parts of the north of England and the richest parts of the southeast are greater today than between East and West Germany before the Berlin Wall fell. That is a national disgrace and something, quite right, it is a shame, and something that all governments, regardless of their political makeup, should set out to challenge.
But it's also worth pointing out that the German government invested £71 billion a year, roughly, a year to level up East Germany, where the government here's annual budget is £4.8 billion.
So you're asking me about
can make that comparison.
Implementation of the Levelling Up Fund. So I think that's the point about hardwiring this through law would ensure that the North, and I'm going to talk about the North as someone who's lived and worked and born and bred in the North of England, the North would get its fair share. And for decades, it's not a Conservative or a Labour thing, I'm sure Tracy would accept. For decades, successive governments have failed to invest properly in the north of England and its infrastructure and transport. I mean, they're on Crossrail 2 in London. We're still waiting for Crossrail 1 in the north of England.
So would you go so far as to do what happens in Germany, because there they have hardwired it into law, where they have a law that requires equality between all 16 states, and then an annual process of funding redistribution to support it. So that's taking away from the government.
I'm not an expert in German law, but I think hardwiring would, over a period of time, we talked about the scale of the challenge, this will take decades to reverse. I wish there was a magic wand. With the government's Levelling Up Fund, we did see some of that. So you got more spent per capita in all areas of the north of England than you did.
Do you think it's working
in London? I do think it's working. I just hope and I know that the government needs to go further and faster. Okay. But if we step back, this is £4 billion that has come to some of the poorest communities across the UK because this government has set out a determination to reverse some of those disgraceful statistics that I started my answer by talking about.
But if I may, just very quickly...
Really quickly, we had lots of you. I've got to hear from the audience.
It is our money. And you have taken it from local authorities that used to deliver these projects like
Tracy,
swimming pools and leisure centres.
It's not your money, it's taxpayers' money.
Well, exactly, it's the public's money.
I think that's what you mean, isn't it? Right, let's hear from some of our audience. Yes, the man there in the red fleece. Just a bit further forward, yeah.
Just given the timescales involved around legislation to hardwire this into law, is that actually a practical solution?
Right, you think it might take too long?
Yeah.
Yes. And the man behind you, yes, in the blue check shirt.
So, Jake, you said earlier that it's right that the levelling up money comes into the north, so why has it taken so long for the government not to be able to see that fact in terms of where it's distributing the money?
OK. And the woman here in the red top, yes.
You just mentioned that the Levelling Up funding is going where it deserves to in the north, and you looked at it per capita. When you look at it per capita, actually, Yorkshire and the Humber, which we are part of, is the third worst funded.
Right. And the man behind you in the glasses?
Yeah, about 13 minutes from here, Doncaster Sheffield Airport's currently sat closed. Would this have happened down south? I bet not. No. And does it not say a lot about Rishi Sunak's leadership?
Konstantin.
I think we talk about levelling up. What we should be talking about is levelling with people here and in the rest of the country. The reason that the disparity that you talk about exists is that you, in this community and communities around the north, bore the brunt of globalisation and deindustrialisation of this country. And there's no point building infrastructure if there's no jobs for people. I don't think what you want here is government handouts. I think what you want is industry and employment so that people can have a decent job and dignity. And We actually have. I mean, I think the world and this country in particular are about to face a very, very challenging time economically. But as deglobalization happens, which is already occurring due to the breakdown of supply chains and so on, what you're going to see is actually we have an opportunity to bring industry back to this country and make things again in this country and buy things made in this country. But that will mean that we have to let go some of our obsessions like net zero and so on. And we will find out if the government's prepared to do that.
OK. Man there in the glasses.
Just a few figures. Scunthorpe, levelling up round 2, no money. Grimsby, levelling up round 2, no money. Cleethorpes, 18.5 million. Allegedly, one man's tax bill plus penalty, 5 million. Here are some figures for you.
Right. Alison.
I just think it is incredibly disappointing that the current system that we've got is causing people to feel like that. So making a situation where people that are underinvested in also just feel they've tried to bid for some money, they haven't succeeded, and then that confirms all their fears that they are being left behind.
So to come back to Anne's question, is it a question of putting it into law?
So I think that whole idea about how, as we were talking about in Germany, so after reunification, you had West Germany, it was up here, and you had East Germany down here. How did they try and bring them to some kind of balance in the middle? They put it into law, and you just ensure that each year the regional disparities become... So it sounds a really sensible idea. And then I think what it does is, because I completely take Jake's point and his frustration that we're still in this situation, because there's certainly been plenty of good intentions about this, but I have to sort of remind Jake as well, you know, his party has been in power for 13 years, so it's not like they got in the day before yesterday. There has been plenty of time to look at this. But what people really need, as we say, is investment in good jobs, is investment in the infrastructure. I mean, the trains that you have to contend with in this part is just horrendous. How are we going to encourage investment? I know we've got British Steel is a huge employer around here, or certainly was a huge employer, and is still an employer. But the way the steel industry has been treated in this country over many years is just terrible. The Mirror's been campaigning for the steel industry since 2015, because there's no commitment to sustainable growth, to supporting our steel in the way that they do in Europe, into helping with energy costs, as they do in Europe, in encouraging people to buy British steel, as they do in other countries. And it's that kind of commitment to proper jobs and to proper infrastructure, which means that communities can thrive rather than being dependent on handouts that might get tossed in their direction once a year.
OK, man there in the grey top.
This was one of Richard's big flagships, you know, levelling up. But all he was talking about was his seatbelt. What I'm trying to say is that a lot of the time, all we seem to talk about is the other things. He should have been able to say, like, this is what, levelling up, you know, this is what we're doing for the country. But we're always distracted by other things. Surely it's got to be that, you know, how can his team let him have a picture with no seatbelt on? It just beggars belief.
OK, and the woman there.
In relation to the levelling up bill, will there be any direction for local councils as to where the money's spent? Because locally there seems to be some quite questionable decisions being made as to where money is spent at the minute.
Like what?
Frodingham, someone would know better than me. Frodingham Road, there was some kind of arch been put into the area that was going to cost, I think it was in the region of £60,000. It was a metal arch over the street. Whereas bus services have been cancelled all over the county.
All right, Jay, do you want a final word before I move on?
Well, look, just on the issue of levelling up, if you want to see some real progress that we've made, it's the creation of devolution deals. I fervently believe, I was Northern Powerhouse Minister, I fervently believe that better ideas are made in the north of England than are ever made in Whitehall. And one of the great sort of totemic things you can see that has already been delivered to drive the local economy is the fact that 65% of the north of England now has a metro mayor, and actually more of it has a devolution deal. Now, I want to see that be 100%. I want this hardwiring of levelling up law to pass forever, power in the hands of local decision makers, because I think that's the best way of driving economic growth. And just to pick up on what Konstantin said, you are so wrong. We do not deliver a growing northern economy by turning our back on net zero. The north of England, this county, this region is a global leader in green technology. We deliver a better levelled up north of England by having green collar, highly paid, secure jobs for people who live in this region. Net zero is the solution, not the problem.
I think it's good for your voters to hear that. I'm sure Conservative Party voters will be pleased. But the other thing is we currently outsource 50% of all our CO2 emissions to other countries. Why don't we bring that manufacturing back to this country and make things here and have jobs for people where we would make things cleaner and they would be better quality? Why don't we do that? Why do we outsource our manufacturing? Why does this country outsource our jobs, these people's jobs, to places like China, to tyrannical regimes like the ones in China or the other countries around the world, instead of making things in this country? Why don't you tell your voters that?
And see the biggest wind farm in the world, just off the coast here, built with British steel. That is about securing jobs in Scunthorpe, other areas of the country, and delivering those highly paid, secure jobs. Because actually, that's what people in the North want.
You haven't answered my question. Why do we outsource half of our emissions?
Onshoring is part of the green industrial
revolution. But why do we outsource half of our
our
production to other countries? Why are things that people buy in this country made in other places?
We are not outsourcing jobs. We've just created 1,000 green jobs in West Yorkshire for young people.
Correct.
We know this is the future for our regions. This is how you level up, is you tackle the climate emergency. Yeah. And that's why investing in green technology, investing in those jobs, investing in onshore and offshore, and making sure, to your point about who gets the benefit, to making sure that our wind farms in Swansea don't then pay for schools in Stockholm. That's why the Labour Party are focused on making sure that we have sustainable green tech in our country that creates amazing jobs for regions like Scunthorpe.
OK, I'm going to take another question because a lot of people asked about this. This is from James Johnson. I just want to point out, if anyone's noticed, we've had... This is the third question row from someone whose surname is Johnson. No, I checked. And apparently...
There's no Boris Johnson.
Well, apparently... well, that would be something, Jake.
He's easy to spot.
Mr Johnson, if you're listening, you want to come on Question Time, we'd be very interested to see you. Apparently, you are not related, you don't know each other. It's just complete coincidence. Or a very common name around these parts. I don't know. James Johnson, let's hear from you.
Is it a good idea for NATO to be supplying Ukraine forces with tanks? Or will it spark World War III?
And is this... How worried are you about that, James, since you asked the question?
I'm a bit undecided about it, because Putin's a very dangerous man, and he's got very good allies with him, especially in China and everything.
Konstantin?
I don't think it's going to spark World War III. I think it really depends on what people want. If you want to support Ukraine and to be able to defend itself, then we have to provide them the things that they need to be able to do that. I personally support that. There are people who disagree, but it's not going to spark World War III. And actually, I think...
How can you be... I'm not warmongering or fearmongering, but how can you be so sure? Because Putin is a... We don't know what he's thinking.
Well, it's very clear, based on what they've said, is they've called this a provocation, but they're not doing anything about it. And I don't think they're going to attack the West in response. The West actually has been pretty smart about this, in that they have been gradually testing the waters as opposed to just throwing lots of stuff at them too. And so it means that there's a sort of marginal effort every time. It doesn't really allow Russia to respond as aggressively as they might otherwise have done. As I say, it depends what you want. If you want Ukraine to survive, then you have to support them with the things that they need. Otherwise, you let Putin take over. I mean, that's the choice. And so, personally, my view is we should provide the Ukrainians with what they need to defend their country.
Because the next step, which Zelensky is asking now for, is fighter jets, which so far has been a red line for NATO. You think that NATO should supply fighters?
I think the first thing NATO should supply is defensive anti-aircraft and anti-missile systems that will allow Ukraine to defend its power stations and power supply networks, which is what Russia is currently attacking. I think that really should be much more of the conversation.
Okay. Alison?
Yes, I think we are in a clearly very dangerous situation, but I think we have to act. I think it was good that we got to that point yesterday where we could show a united force across Europe and the United States, because I think it not only is the actual tanks that we're delivering, but it's also that political message that Putin hasn't managed to cause divisions amongst the West, which I think is what he was hoping to do. But we have to be very mindful that, you know, Zelensky was asking for 300 tanks. We're probably coming up with around about 130. As we say, there's still lots and lots of other equipment that they require. Yes, he would like planes as well, and that's going to be a big call. And I think we all have to go into this with our eyes wide open. How much are we prepared to give to Ukraine? Are we prepared to give what it takes? because that could be an awful lot. But I think we haven't really got a choice, because if we don't deal with Putin now, we'll be dealing with him in Poland or Estonia or elsewhere. And you ask those people that live in those countries, Finland, Poland, they are terrified. They are pouring money into this effort because they know that they'll be next. And, you know, is it a third world war? I don't know how you quantify that really, but it's certainly a war between democracy and dictatorship. And I think we need to know what side we're on, and then we're going to do whatever it takes to support it.
OK, let's hear from our audience. The man here in the front.
Should we not be going in a bit harder supporting Ukraine to stop Russia thinking they can just
Well, I mean, that is a very interesting point.
Like send troops, for example?
Troops, yes, jets.
OK.
He needs shutting down before
this
he
is the conversation
tries to take
we
over
need
the
to
world.
have, because if we're going to have to do that in 6 months or a year's time, there is an argument, is it better to act sooner and quicker?
We should have gone in sooner, yes. We should have gone in a lot sooner.
OK, let's get a few more views. The man there on the corner in the blue sweater.
I'm half Ukrainian, and I think we should give the Ukrainians everything they need, because the buck's got to stop somewhere, and if we don't give them arm the Ukrainians, Putin's just going to keep rolling on.
OK. And do you still have family there?
I have some family there, yes, in Lviv.
And what are they telling you?
I haven't been in touch.
Right, OK. The man there, yes, you're waving your hand like that, yeah.
I think there's a comparison here we can draw in history. I don't think Putin will stop with Ukraine. He'll probably want to enlarge this, what he considers to be a Soviet empire. He'll want to move into Poland next, Estonia. People had the same choice to make in the 1930s, and they didn't. They sat back, and that cost a lot more lives than they stood up to Hitler in the first place and took him on at the beginning. We've got the same situation now with Putin and Ukraine.
So Tracy, the fact that tanks are now being sent, we know that Germany hesitated for some considerable time about the decision, not only because of their history. Tanks rolling into Europe was not a look that they particularly want to emulate, but also because they saw it as an escalation, and they were very unsure about that. Are we right to send tanks? Is it raising the threat of direct confrontation between NATO and Russia, do you think?
I think we're absolutely right to send tanks in. And I think I'm really proud of the way that Europe has come together and stood side by side with Ukraine. When I was a Member of Parliament, I was on the Parliamentary Armed Forces scheme and really privileged to spend time with the Yorkshire Regiment in Estonia. And to Alison's point, the Estonians and the whole of Europe are really focused on making sure that they can defeat Putin. But it is the long haul. And for the families, the Ukrainian families in West Yorkshire, who I've met many of them, and for those who've come over and have found sanctuary in homes of Yorkshire folk, I just want to thank them for their open-heartedness, taking people in. But also to say to government that we can't waver. We have to focus and support NATO to make sure that however long this is, we are in it for the long haul and we won't abandon our Ukrainian friends.
And, Jake, we've heard at least two people from the audience saying, actually, you should give Ukrainians what they want. Because we know President Zelensky is now asking for planes. You talked about, get ground troops in there. Are there any red lines, do you think? Should there be any red lines for us?
Well, I think the approach we've taken of giving support when asked for and when required is the right approach. We have to be very careful that we don't see an escalation into a nuclear conflict. But the government absolutely has done the right thing with the support of the opposition parties and also with support around the world to give these tanks. It's the right thing to do. I just sort of look back and think if we'd have stood this firm against Putin when he rolled into Crimea several years ago,
2014.
Would we be having this conflict now? I suspect we wouldn't. He's a nasty bully who is pursuing an illegal war on the soils of Europe. We cannot allow that to happen, and we have to stand firm with the people of Ukraine. And we should take pride as British people at having been one of the leading supporters of our allies in Ukraine from the start of this conflict. In fact, providing more training than any other nation before the conflict even started. But if we fail to act now, I think a member of the audience pointed out that we will find ourselves fighting on the soils of Poland, that really is World War III. And we have to do everything within our power to avoid it.
And you say we should respond to when asked. President Zelensky has asked for fighter jets. Should we be giving them to him?
Well, I don't feel I'm equipped to give that answer tonight. I think it's something that has to be debated in Parliament and also in NATO. But I just think we have to stand firm. We should be exceptionally proud of the things we've done, including families in Rosendale and Darwin who've welcomed in Ukrainian families. I think Britain can be proud of her role.
So, like you, I'm half Russian, half Ukrainian, and I would very much echo the last point that you made, Jake. People in Ukraine are immensely grateful for the support that Britain has provided. I think we should be very proud in this country. And on behalf of them, thank you. I think they'd all want me to pass that on. Can I quibble with something you said, Fiona, briefly about Germany? Because actually, and this comes back to the debate we were having earlier, the reason Germany is so hesitant to support Ukraine is not some kind of sentiment about World War II and a bad look and all that. The reason they're hesitant is they depend on Russian gas. They need Russian energy.
But there's also great sensitivity in Germany.
I understand.
About
but the main driver of that hesitation is the fact that they're relying on Russian gas. And this is why I come back to the point about energy security. We have to produce our own energy if we want to be safe in the world. It is essential that we do this. So it's very important. And finally, red lines. If you send British troops into Ukraine, you are going to be in World War III. And I say that as someone who's fiercely pro-Ukrainian, who's opposed Putin's invasion from the beginning. That is a red line we must not cross.
Okay. All right. I'm going to move on, take another question now. As ever with this programme, it's a massive turn to a completely different subject. But quite a few people have been asking about this. So, Marie Girdham, where are you? Right, let's hear from you.
As a woman myself in the postmenopausal stage of life, should the government have rejected a proposal to have menopause leave pilots in England?
Right, so for those of you not aware, this week the government rejected a recommendation by the cross-party Women and Equalities Committee. They wanted to make it illegal to discriminate against women because they're experiencing the menopause. This was a cross-party recommendation, and they also suggested having a pilot to try that idea out. And the government decided that they're not in favour of that idea. Alison.
I think this is quite a tricky one, really. To the point where, because I think it's tricky, I think maybe the pilot would have been a good idea because of the reason it's a pilot and we could have seen whether it worked. So, as I understand it, there is already legislation there which protects women from their sex, if there's a disability, and age are sort of protected characteristics already. So I wasn't completely convinced that menopause necessarily needs to be a protected characteristic. So I think there are things that are already there.
Well, what the government was saying is, and it's slightly complex, forgive me, but what you can't do with equality is apply it to dual characteristics. So menopause, you could argue, comes under age and sex, and therefore the Equality Act might not apply to men.
And so the mere fact that it's that complicated that we're having that bit of the conversation makes me wonder, isn't actually what's actually of more use to women is easy access to the healthcare they require, easy, cheap access to HRT, and flexible working arrangements and bosses who understand what women might be feeling if they're going through the menopause. And that actually they're kind of practical things that we could do here and now and immediately and make that better for women. And also sometimes I'm not sure whether I just want to be judged on a medical basis. I don't know, there's more to me than just the medical bits, I don't know. But clearly there is clearly a demand from many women who are feeling, we know that women are dropping out of the workforce at that age. But there again, we also know lots of people dropping out of the workforce at that age because they're not getting the healthcare that they require. So on balance, I kind of thought, well, maybe the pilot would have been the best way to testing out all these conflicting thoughts.
Now, I want to hear from some women as well as men in the audience. Obviously, Trace, I'll come to you in a minute, but you just shot your hand up there with the black hair and black top.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right that we need to start walking before we start running, and the priority has to be access to the right medical advice. So many women are just getting it's just a lottery depending on who your GP is and where their perception of the menopause.
And what would you think about the idea that you could go to your boss and say, I'm menopausal, and actually at the moment I just don't feel well enough to work. It can be for a variety of reasons, but I don't feel well enough to work and therefore have the right to be able to...
Personally, I wouldn't feel comfortable with that at all.
Right.
I think it's about actually having access. I've been very lucky with my GP and I am on the right HRT and I am getting the right services, which has made a massive transformation, and I am able to do those things and work effectively.
So it's about access for you?
But
Okay.
yeah, it's about the access completely.
There's a woman here.
As somebody who's gone through it, if men went through the menopause, would the law have been changed?
Okay. Konstantin.
Oh, compulsory menopause, that sounds interesting.
I quite like that idea. Even things up a bit.
I knew we were going to cover explosive subjects, and I didn't know it would get quite this controversial.
Well, not necessarily. It depends on your point of view.
Yeah, I suppose it does. Look, I don't know a lot about it. I'm certainly not in favour of anyone being discriminated against because they're going through something like that. So if there's a way we can do a pilot to find out what is going on, what would be the best way to deal with that, I'm fully on board with that.
And in terms of making it illegal to discriminate against people, or you know, because they are experiencing the menopause, so they would have right to leave and time off to see the doctor and various other things. Would you support that?
I don't know. I'd have to look at what the pilot comes up with. I mean, I happen to find myself in a position where our YouTube show has grown to a point where we employ people, and I would certainly hope that as someone who's part of the management of that, our employees could come to us and say, and we could have that conversation rather than having to have the law involved. But I understand that won't be the case for everybody. So, but for me, it's always, I would want employers to be understanding of people's situations, wherever possible, really.
Have we got any employers in the audience here? Yes. So you in the check shirt, what would you think of this if this came into law?
Small businesses would really suffer. I think putting things in law makes it very difficult for small businesses to survive, and we have a small workforce, so it would be a real difficulty to say, yes, you can go off. Who's going to do the job?
But you could say that applies for maternity leave.
Yes, but with the maternity leave, that is...
And of course paternity leave.
Yes, absolutely. But you've got to give small businesses the right to be, as we were saying earlier on, to level up, and making more and more obstacles for us doesn't help. And
you were a GP, you were talking earlier.
Yes, I just wanted to share my experiences. So 90% of patients I see are women, which is what I expect to deal with, and over 50% of them come with menopausal symptoms. Now, menopause is a disorder. Perimenopause is a disorder. I think we should treat it like any other illnesses. The symptoms can be debilitating. The symptoms can really affect your quality of life. So I don't see how it should be treated differently to other illnesses, for example, a chest infection or a sore throat. So I think it needs to be treated like any other medical disorder.
OK. Tracy?
Well, I think the GP is my new best friend because we keep agreeing on things.
But what about putting it into law? And that's what the pilot was going to look at, whether or not it should be illegal to discriminate against women.
Well, that gives protections to women. And I do understand the gentleman who runs an SME. It is difficult when you've maybe 4 or 5 members of staff. But because it's in law, you would be protected in the same way maternity and paternity. There would be opportunities to backfill and so on. Because I do think it's only fair that if a woman going through the menopause has, you know, massive flushes and sweats, and she's in a public-facing role, there can be accommodations that maybe she go into a different role where, you know, she can pick and choose whether she wants to be facing the public or not. And as somebody who's gone through the menopause, I do know that it can be quite debilitating in that the sweats, the rage, the
rage.
The
rage, did you say?
Rage.
I never saw that when you've been on Question Time before.
I know, I'm through it now. You wouldn't know. But I think every woman is different. And I think Carolyn Harris, actually, all credit to her as a Member of Parliament, who has led from the front on this campaign. And I only read, I'm sure it's right, that the government have now agreed that prescriptions for HRT will not be at the usual prescription price because it is an ongoing year-long condition, and that we shouldn't have to pay a woman tax because of what is happening to us.
The man back there in the glasses.
I think it's a missed opportunity. I'm a consultant in the NHS, and I think by missing this opportunity, we have
by not having the pilot,
not having the pilot,
exploring whether it could be put into
exactly
law.
Because I think we should not shy away, as the GP put it. We should not shy away from discussing it, and we and this will also employ the employers to make adequate changes at their workplace, like turning the heating up or turning the heating down in theatres and working environments. So I think I would support a pilot and go through this.
All right. Jack, I'll come to you. Let me just hear from the woman there in the pink scarf. She's had her hand up for a while. Yes.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of issues at play here. First of all, the demographic of women going through the menopause, we're kind of invisible, and we're happy to kind of, you know, sit at the back of the queue and not really ask for what we want. And the second thing is, when you are going through the menopause, you don't really know what you want because you're confused anyway. It's a really confusing subject, and you're not really sure what help is out there and what to ask for.
OK, Jake.
Well, look, you are not without a voice, because we have Caroline Harris in Parliament, who is a Labour MP who's extremely forceful, and Caroline Noakes, who's a Conservative MP, and they've done brilliant work on this. And I think at one point we're actually, because there was an HRT shortage, we're sharing their prescription with each other. Probably, you know, they've. Is that in the area of PMI? I couldn't say no. Anyway, but what the government has done is to cap the cost of HRT, because it's absolutely wrong that there is a woman tax and people having to pay for HRT at £18.79 per year.
And what these women are also pressing for is in terms of
and the other thing the government has done is
law.
It is working with employers to make menopause leave easier for people to get. Look, on the question of law, it's not. I don't believe, as a Conservative, that the government should always reach for legislation in every single case. There is already legislation in place that requires employers where people have issues with their health. Menopause affects women in a different way. For some of them, it can be seriously debilitating. There is already a requirement for employers to make reasonable adjustments, and some of the things Tracy was speaking about, people moving away from the front of house role. I think a member of the audience talked about turning down the heating, or it may have been you. That is a reasonable adjustment, and every employer should already be doing it. But actually, and I'm not one of these people who've worked in politics, my background is business. If you look at the employment market, it is such a competitive market at the moment. Employers are in a position where they have to behave reasonably. They need to communicate with their staff, whether that's giving them flexible working, enabling them to work from home, or making reasonable adjustments for health issues like the menopause. If they don't do that, they will lose their staff, they will go somewhere else, and that will be in a market where it's very difficult to replace those people. So I think the government's approach is saying, let's entrust employers to work reasonably with their staff, keep in place the existing legal protections while doing other things like capping the cost of HRT. I think we're in about the right spot on it. OK, I've got back just a minute left. Yes, the man there with the blue sweater. Yes, you.
99% of businesses are SMEs. They're hampered.
Small and medium enterprises.
Small and medium-sized enterprises, sorry. We know many are on the verge of collapse in 2023. They're already hampered by lots of things they have to do, and bringing something else in is going to make it even more difficult. What can we do? I don't know. I've seen my wife go through this, but adding something else to SMEs is really going to damage the economy.
We need to trust SMEs to do the right thing. I know small businesses will. They have a history of doing it. They do it, and the government should trust them to do it.
The woman at the very back with the glasses. Yes, you, in the middle.
It's debilitating in the menopause, but it's fixable by bringing down the cost of the pills that make you feel wonderful.
The HRT, which is what we've been talking about. Yeah.
And also, if we had more women leaders and women who are running SMEs, we might have had this much earlier on, because women understand, because they've been through it, and that, you know, if they're setting the rules, then I think it will be easier for everyone. OK. On that note, our time is up. Thank you very much to the panel, to all of you for coming and playing your part and letting us hear your views. Thank you very much indeed. And of course, thank you to you at home for watching. Just a reminder that, of course, we're on BBC One after 10 o'clock news, but we're also live on iPlayer at 8 o'clock every week, in case after the news it's too late for your bedtime. So, thank you very much from our panel, from our audience, and thank you for watching. Next week, we're in Glasgow. See you there. Bye-bye.